Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming. And as we just said, this is a really important meeting. So find the recording afterwards and share it out with your network. I had the pleasure about a month ago of seeing Kim at the Yamhill County Democrats give a presentation. And I was surprised at how excited I got about rural caucusing and knew that I had to have them on tonight. Kim is the chair of the Rural Caucus and the vice chair of the DPO, and had more ideas about reaching young NAVs than I had heard in the past. And so I'm super excited to introduce Kim. And go ahead, just take it away. This will be action packed, guys. Listen up.
Well, good evening, everybody. So first of all, thank you for the invite. In my community, we had an indivisible group throughout COVID. And then after COVID, we were just such a small community. They slowly just said, you know what, just go be a Dem, because we were already meeting once a month with them. So I understand that, in our indivisible group, there was a lot of people who were not Democrats. There was 2 Republicans, a lot of actually non-affiliated voters. A couple of them didn't even know that that's what they were. And that's one of the things that got me thinking about what is a non-affiliated voter. Having always been, obviously I'm not, I was born and voting before 1998. So therefore I've always had to register as with a political party. And so it took me a while to understand what was going on and why so many of our, especially younger people, were detached from voting and from understanding what was going on. So I originally did the presentation I'm going to do tonight. I've done it 3 times. The biggest one I've ever done was for the Oregon Summit. They meet every other year. And so it's just it's a big event. And there's quite a few people there. And so originally it's called Dirt Road Democrats. And so I did change it because, again, for this group, I've changed it to Dirt Road Democracy, because I just want to be really respectful, and I want people to feel included. We don't, there's one of the people that I work with has a great thing where he says, we don't need people again, he's a Democrat. We don't need people to register to be Democrats. We just need them to vote like Democrats. And that really made me think about things. Sometimes we're so tied to, I'm going to win this by so many voters, instead of like, but did we win the election? Did we get the candidate we want to win? Did we get the ballot measure or the county measure? Did we get that to pass? That's more, or not pass in some cases, right? So I'm going to do a screen share pretty soon. But what I wanted to say was that feel free, Teresa, hopefully you can flag if somebody has a question where it's just flat out you don't want to wait, then go ahead and ask. But we do have a lot of time set at the end, but for questions. But if I'm explaining something and it does not make sense, don't wait till the end to say, by the way, what does that mean? Because I don't want the presentation to not make sense to you. I have a couple titles to my name. The one I'm actually most proud of is my work in Jefferson County. I am rural raised, traveled the world, literally came back, eventually moved back to Jefferson County, opened a business here, and I'm actually really happy I moved back. It is hard for many of us who live in rural communities, though, to have connections because we oftentimes feel like we don't fit in. So part of my bias is around that. I would like to say, though, since we're talking about NAV or non-affiliated voter outreach, that many NAVs also feel like they do not fit in, at least in the political scheme of things. They don't understand who their candidate is. So we're going to step back and talk about what does it mean to do NAV outreach and what might it look like. So technically I'm the vice chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon. I'm the Rural Caucus chair. I still serve on the Jefferson County Dems, and do other things like that. So I will be sharing at the end. Please reach out to me if you have questions. If you have a group where you want me to present, happy to do that. If you want me to look at some of your stats, I'm not a huge political statistician, but I have some basic chops around NAV stuff. So if you want me to take a look at your county or maybe a city, and we can maybe take a look at who your NAVs are, how do they vote and undervote, things like that, I am happy to help you with that. You might need the tenacity of Teresa, who had to nag me. So I just, so you know, email is not the best way to get a hold of me. It's actually texting, and then occasionally, I'm not offended by nagging. All the kids that know that I work with, that I do volunteering work in the schools, because that's where I feel like we are missing the boat the most, is with our young people. My community is predominantly Latino, about quarter Native American, and the rest of people are mostly Caucasian. But they all know if they're going to send me something via email, they better text me first or I'll never see it. So feel free to do the same thing to me. So let's see if I can. Looks like I can just share, right? Okay.
You want me to put your contact in while you're talking?
Yes, please. Go ahead and do that.
I'll do that.
I want to make sure I got the correct one. If this isn't the right one, I thought I got it right, but you know, get over here and then all of a sudden you're like, who's in charge of this? Okay, so Dirt Road Democracy. I just want to make sure I wasn't looking at an old one. Does that make sense? The one I previously did, because I did base this off that. So let me get my little people. And Teresa, I'm going to put the everything down below. So let me know if we need, as far as, I won't see if anyone's sending me a question. So, Dirt Road Democracy. So does anyone know how to make this just show this? Is there a trick to that part? I always forget.
You see slideshow up at the top of your screen?
I
Kim,
think I just
click on slide. There you go. You got it.
got it. Yeah. Okay. So all right. So I'm still not, I apologize, people.
You're rehearsing.
Right? Looks like it's doing it for me. Oh, is that why it's doing it?
Mhm.
I'm like,
It's
what is this
rehearsing
stuff?
it.
Maybe if you go up to, just exit out of this and then go up to slideshow, and instead of doing what you did, just click first slide.
Go back out of that.
I
Escape.
don't know.
Yeah, escape.
Looks okay to me though, except for that welcome and.
Yeah, but I don't know how to escape because I can't see any of my controls,
No,
right?
you have a
You
key
just
on
hit
your
escape
computer
button
that's,
on your computer.
Yep, just a regular one, but it
Yep.
looks like it was going to back. Okay. Sorry,
There you
people.
go.
Now
It's all
go to
great when you're doing it
slideshow
wrong.
and then hit from beginning. So over on the
I
left-hand
see.
side, it says from beginning.
I've been playing with them, but I've always been printing them out, so I apologize
There
for
you
that.
go.
So, and then can you see my controls too? How do I get rid of them?
That's,
Or can you see the controls, or you don't see the controls?
No,
we don't see the controls.
All right, thank you. Sorry, everybody. So, hey, can you delete that part of the video? Just kidding. So, Dirt Road Democracy, and it's specifically about the non-affiliated voter outreach. I've already introduced myself, so let's go to the next page. I forget that's me in charge. Okay, so again, NAVs, it's non-affiliated voters, and it began November 3rd of 1998. It was passed in 1995. So for most of us on the Zoom here, we never had to deal with registering with our driver's license unless you move to the state, or sometimes when you change counties, it might be that. So NAVs are often in this category by default. They don't know anything different. Younger voters usually land here through a lack of self-awareness and around self-determination of a political party. This means oftentimes they don't even know what it means to be a Democrat or a Republican, or they might not even know the difference between being an independent and a non-affiliated or similar. NAVs are the least contacted group of voters. Why is this actually a big deal? Because it means that they actually get the least to no mail. If you do something by mail, they're the least likely to have their doors knocked on and similar. I don't know how many of you have access to something like Van, where you can find out if somebody leans blue or leans red. But when you look at NAVs, they oftentimes have had very little polling done on them, so we don't even know what they're about. So an example be in rural Oregon, many people, regardless of party affiliation in rural Oregon, own guns, and that's enough to make most of them, according to many statistics, lean red, which is not necessarily the case. So that's an example of these biases that can be built into some of the NAVs information. NAVs are the least educated about candidates. Again, they're not being contacted. And often about ballot measures. If you ask them, they oftentimes don't know that there's gonna be a ballot measure because they might not have been contacted. They receive limited campaign literature. Where they're most likely to be contacted is actually around in specific special districts. So like we had a pool up recently, and so because of that, everybody in the district that's a voter got something. So that's when they might be contacted. But otherwise, if people are going to save their money, the first thing they do with a campaign is to cut out the NAV voters. I would actually argue it's one of the first people we should contact, because if you're a Democrat, we know that the vast majority of Democrats are going to vote blue in an election. We have no idea how NAVs are going to vote. So it's a great way to get them, connected with whatever you are focusing on. And again, Republicans are afraid of young NAVs. They just are terrified of them. In fact, when I first started talking about wanting to non-affiliated voter outreach, even the Dems actually just pushed back on me hard, like really, really hard. I was chair of the Jefferson County Democrats, but I was involved in I'm in CD2, Congressional District 2, and just hardcore pushback on doing this. So I said, I'm probably similar to all of you. I'm going to find a way to get around what I need to get done, right? We've all had to do that. So you're like, how do I get my neighbors to know that is really not a really good way to be doing this? Why don't we talk about this issue or that issue? So in my case, I took it back to Jefferson County. I was the chair of the Democrats at that time. I took it back to Jefferson County and I just started doing it. I started doing it with a county that I was really familiar with. And so I went from there to learning about what kind of outcome would we get. In fact, it was 2 years ago now, where Jefferson County was the first or second, I can't remember, of the counties that had the, again, percentage-wise, because we have very few Dems, right? But the percentage-wise of growth of Democrats in our county from NAVs. And that's specifically, I believe, from our outreach program that we did. I also was spending a lot of times with kids, so high schoolers. So I started asking them, how many of you know that you're how many of you are registered voters? And you'd get like 2 hands would be raised, right? And I'd like, how many of you have a driver's license? And bam, all their hands would go up. And I'd be like, and that's the kind of questions that help me understand how bad is this really in real time, right? Because I'm a volunteer for the Key Club Advisor, I don't have to follow quite the same rules that many educators do, right? Because I'm not an employee of a school district. So I found out that we need to not be afraid of young voters. We just need to learn more about them. So number one misconception, all NAVs are created equal. They are not. We must pick and choose who we are contacting and when. So specifically, when people talk about getting the cost down, you do that by choosing who you're going to contact and how you're going to contact. Before this meeting started, there was a little bit of a conversation around doing voter outreach on foot, canvassing. There's a lot of people in my communities and rural communities, they don't want to do canvassing. They don't want to reach people at the doorstep. They want to know who they are, maybe before they have a personal in-face contact with them. So postcards are an example of the way we oftentimes reach NAVs. And we can direct that. So you have to make a choice. What do we want? We want to reach the NAVs that are most open to our candidate, our election, or our measure. So I also want to put in there that NAVs need education. So an example would be before primaries this year and basically even years, we spend a lot of time talking to NAVs two-step. First step is actually to let them know, hey, you're a non-affiliated voter. Do you know what this means? And so an example would be they can't vote at the primary the same way somebody can if they're a registered Dem or a Republican, you know, they don't have anyone. So you get a whole bunch of kids. We saw that in 2016, a lot of young voters in Oregon, very, very excited to vote for Obama. And then he wasn't on the ballot for the primary. That absolutely destroyed a lot of their belief in the voters. Like, my vote doesn't matter. It's like, I wished we had known more about the impact something like that would have, especially to our young voters in Oregon. So that's something to think about when we're reaching NAVs. So we want to keep our NAV outreach program cost effective. So that means if I have, you know, 100,000 NAVs, I don't remember what the statistic is in Oregon. It's like we have all these NAVs. We don't need to reach all of them. We need to target who we're going to reach and how we're going to reach. So if you're looking at a place like Portland, if you're in areas of Portland and you're doing NAV outreach, it's probably safe to say the majority of the people are blue leaning, right? Regardless of their age. If you're in, say, the farther east you go, the majority of the people that you go to reach that are NAVs are going to be, you know, red leaning, you know, so you have to pay attention to those type of things. Also with your cost effective, you want to spend your money on the most positive outcome you can get. And again, we're trying to develop long-term changes in voting behavior. Sometimes that means that they just learn about voting and they find out where they can go to look up about their candidates or ballot measures or similar. And then we want to keep our NAV outreach volunteers excited about their work. When I do NAV outreach, we primarily do postcards because we can write them in advance, stack them, and mail them out right before ballots come out. And then we can have our second, some of these guys, we do a second postcard for certain ages and similar, and we'll have a second one that comes out maybe a week after that. We'll do something like that. We can do it in advance. But our NAV outreach, they're almost like, they're great social gatherings because you can do your postcard work. We do pre-printed postcards that say what we need to say. We always leave room for an individual message. That makes a big deal. And this is the one that kills some people. I always, if you're in my group, you're always going to be asked to do your addresses with a pen, you know, not to have a printed address, because the address that it's handwritten, people are more likely to flip that card over. And because I'm a little bit of I spend enough time with these kids that I'll say things like, you know, did you know that you were non-affiliated voter and you're going to miss out on being able to vote for these things, these positions for the primary. And then here you can go to check on your registration, make sure you're registered, et cetera, et cetera. I know they're registered. They might not know they're registered, and they definitely, so I kick them to the place where they can sign up for a party. And then my second postcard, I usually handwrite, did you check? Do you even know? Do you know what we're talking about? You better check that link. And I always use QR codes. If I'm connecting with somebody who's 40 and over, I probably don't worry the same about QR codes. So that's how you can work your program a little bit. And again, NAV outreachers, volunteers, they are so excited about this work. Is that overview good on people so far? Does anyone have any questions around that? We're good?
Kim, I have a question.
Let's hear it.
In determining a list in the van, and by the way, guys, this is Michael Lynn, chair of the Polk County Democrats. In determining a list to use for texting NAVs, what are the profiles that you would use? And can you speak at all to the one that was set up by the DPO? It says DPO NAV ID universe 60 to 75 scored, or what that might mean. And so, like, what's the criteria for picking the best list of NAVs for
Of who to
outreach
reach out to?
In this manner?
So that's a really good question, Mike. Do you guys want me to, I'm gonna, just a second, I'm gonna stop share. So you can see my face. So thanks, Michael. That's a good question. So a couple things around that. If you are not involved in and having access to some of these big databases, VAN is just the Voter Access Network, or you might see it Vote Builder now. Those of us a little older, huh, Michael? We call it VAN still because we don't like to change the name of anything. And so he's talking about a score. And so if you had, it's a 0 to 10 score, and the closer you are to 10, it's the closer you are to 1 out. So if it's a 9, it means 9 out of 10 people that you contact, whether it be texting or whatever, calling, they're likely to vote blue. That's the way it's set up. It's not a guarantee. Doesn't mean they are a 9, that they fit in the likely to be out of 10 people you contact, 9 of them will be blue. So you're doing a 6 to 7. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I remind people, NAVs have just crappy scores. So it's hard to go with that. Before I became an officer in the Jefferson County Democrats, I was like a score of 2 because I have a concealed weapons permit in the state of Oregon. Now, that's not uncommon for somebody like myself who spent so much. I only got married in my 40s. I spent most of my life alone in the woods, and I carried a gun, and I wanted to do it legally. So that put me on this realm over here. And I was like, how can I get the weirdest Republican stuff? This is just because I'm pretty strong left, right? And so I was like, how can you be so liberal? Anyway, you get my point, right? So here's what I'll tell you. It doesn't seem to matter whether you're rural or urban, although it's an even higher score in the urban, the really metro areas. 85% of kids under the age of 25 are blue leaning. Just period. So I just say I'm not going to pay attention to the score. I go by age. Age is the #1 indicator with NAVs. And the younger the NAVs are, the least likely they are to have any understanding of the process. And we're going to talk a little bit about them because how they vote is similar to how you and I vote, but we have relationship. I didn't see anyone under 25. So if you are, forgive me here on the call. If that we have relationship with candidates, we have relationships with our communities. The younger the voter, they have more, especially recently with the 25 and under, it's 26 or 27 and under is Gen Z. Their relationship is predominantly still with their family. It's not as much with their community yet. Or they might have a relationship with their university or their trade school, but still their relationship, even then, they're still getting a ballot for where they're from, because very few of them change their voter registration, right? And so because of that, they could literally be in Corvallis and they're getting a ballot from, say, wherever, somewhere in Polk County. They might not even know who's running for mayor or understand what's going on in any of your communities, Michael. So you can see where that's where it's real important to pay attention. So again, I go by age. If you're going with the older people, if you're going over.
So here's what we did, Kim. Here's what we did is we split it up. We sent text out to 4,500 NAVs in Polk County. And that was comprised of 3 groups, one 25 and under NAVs, and then another one that had a Democrat in the household. And then the final one, I think was, and all of them had DNC support scores of 90 or above. And I was talking to Jonathan or somebody, and they said, a better way to do that would be to use this 60 to 75% score of propensity to vote. And the voting history, and that for some reason that was the target area because these people did vote, but they weren't voting 100% of the time, but to choose that 60 to 70, but we did use a youthful target.
And so Jonathan is a staff member with the Democratic Party of Oregon, so some people know, and he is fantastic, and he runs our van.
Yeah.
And so what I want to add to that, Michael, is Jonathan has also made the Rural Universe, and it sounds like a great, random thing, but it's actually around NAV with scoring. So
right.
So I want to step back a second, and one of the things that I put on here is, maybe we weren't there yet, is that with the NAVs, you have to make a decision about what are you going after? What are your goals? Because it's your goals that's going to determine, Michael, who you want to send your information out to. And we can talk more later on, okay?
Yeah,
So
okay.
when you're doing something like texting, your cost is time, but it's your texts are generic, right? You preset a text, everybody's kind of get the same thing. If they respond, you start to have a conversation, right? So when you do, if you choose to do something like a postcard or even hang something on someone's doorknob, I was here, I dropped by. When you do that, you in turn can have a longer conversation. You can also put in potentially more links or graphics than you might be able to with texting. But I'm happy to, I want to make sure I present everything and then we'll come back because you're
Thanks a lot.
some people might not be at that level.
Thanks a lot.
And let me come, no, Michael, thank you, but definitely we can talk later on too. Are you coming this weekend? That's a bummer. All right, so we'll
No,
talk
so
later
I
on.
couldn't make it. I couldn't make it.
No, that's good. So, all right, let me get, all right, officially, here we go. Oh gosh, we have to do it again, right? Just kidding. See if I can do better this time. Okay, nav campaigns are game changers. And here's one of the reasons why they're game changers. They can literally sway your entire election. And I'm going to talk about a couple of ways it can do that. So keep in mind, many navs are disenfranchised. They went to vote, they couldn't vote for who they wanted to. They couldn't vote for, anybody maybe in a primary in a presidential year. They don't understand what a primary is. So it's hard for them to even know why they couldn't vote. They just know that they could vote for like all these judges and they couldn't vote for maybe anything else. That's one thing. And this is really, really important. Younger navs are not candidate driven at all. They are all about issues. They want to know what you're doing about water. They want to know what you're doing, other types of the environment. They want to know right now reproductive rights. The big thing with many young navs right now is actually they're pro-Palestinian. They're very interested in moving the needle in that direction. So those are issues. So if you are even working for a candidate or anything like that, you might want to talk a little bit about the candidate. Really, you want to say what your candidate stands for, what issues they back, and then link them to that issue. Does that part make sense? Because your younger voters, if you give them a list of names, they're probably not even going to much pay attention because they have no connection to those people. You're going to want to get back to issues. Again, that's particularly Gen Z, but it's also the millennials too. And so you need to have NAV campaigns also that are specific to the NAV group. An example would be, when possible, I do postcards that are slightly different for the different genders, in part just to try to see what works, right? So reproductive rights is reasonable for those that we know, because there's so much we're missing. We don't know if they're non-binary or anything like that, but we usually know if they're, quote, male or female. That's one of the statistics we have. Sometimes you can go by name if you're trying to figure that out. But so you also can sometimes go by what their last name is, but obviously sometimes that doesn't make any difference. In most communities, they do not keep track of the Latino voters unless you've put it into the database. They're just in there under non-Hispanic whites, right? That's kind of a vague term for many situations here. So you need to take a look at who you're trying to reach and around what. And so an example would be, one of the best ways we have been able to get things passed with our special elections and our districts is focus on specific ages and what they might be interested. Like when we try to get a school bond passed, we can do a lot of work. So we did last fall, we had a school bond and it was going to be close. So we did NAV outreach specifically to younger voters, talking about all the different sports stuff that was going to be added. We're going to get a soccer field. We're going to get it. Does that make sense? Because that's what they want to know. Is their school going to be better than when they left it? Hey, it's not really sexy, as they say, but it actually works because they're attached to the issue. They don't want to know how much they're going to pay on taxes because guess what? They don't own a home. Doesn't make any sense to them. They don't even know how to calculate that, but they do care how the school is. So where to start. And gets back a little bit to what you were talking about, Michael. You need to set your goals of your outreach. It's not always an election. Again, we do some that's about straight up education. And or if it is about a specific election, how do they connect with each other? And you need to keep in mind that the need to educate NAVs takes time. One of the things you might consider doing is you send a text or your postcard where you say, hey, I'd like to reach out to you personally. Let me know if that's not okay. It kind of gives you a little bit of permission, and then maybe you can do your door knocking or something like that. Or you can do a personal text if you want, or a more personal postcard. Again, I recommend if you're doing postcards, you at least put something personal on everything. So what data do you need? Preferably you want to have, and if I have, where am I for time? When possible, you're going to want to know some of the statistics about either your county, your city, your special district, something like that. You're going to want to know, are your younger voters tend to be in your cities? If that's where, even if it's in a small community, like in even rural, it's in your biggest city is usually your place where you have more younger voters. And so you also want to take a look at your voter turnout and what kind of undervotes you have. NAVs tend to be the largest group that undervotes. If you're not familiar, an undervote means that they voted, but they didn't vote. So like, I have to admit, I often am an undervote for judges because it's like, well, there's just one of them and I don't like that person, so I don't vote. And so that would be an undervote according to that. They expect it in some areas, but it's really a big deal if we can get NAVs to be invested in every single candidate or election that we're having. So you also want to look at the population density throughout your county and areas of higher or lower voter density. It's not always related because again, a family is going to have less, if you have more families together, you're going to have potentially less voters per the amount in the family, right? If you have 3 kids and a single parent, you have 1 voter in the home. Who can help you? And then I'm going to give you a few statistics. I'm the Rural Caucus chair. You can always sign up for that if you're interested. You can go to the DPO and the caucuses and just become a member. In the middle of July, I'm going to start doing NAV outreach and other types of outreach every other week. I just do trainings between now and the election just to help support different communities. There are so many different rural democracy groups. They're really making a big difference. All of these democracy groups around the state, just like you guys writing postcards or doing voter outreach for people in Arizona, you're making a difference. When you can, you need somebody like Michael was talking about his area. He knows about his precincts. He knows about a special district. You need somebody local to help you with that. And number one, you actually need local volunteers who are invested in their communities and want to see a stronger democracy. All right, I'm going to give you a couple stats, and then to kind of work you through something here, and then I'm going to turn it over to questions. So I'm using Jefferson County in part because it's actually a smaller area, so the numbers are easier to do. We don't have that many people here. I think we have about 24,000 now. So this was 2023. We had, I'm rounding, 3,300 Dems, 5,600 Republicans, but over 7,000 NAVs. So under 30, we had 2,300 NAVs. Under 35, we had over 3,000 NAVs. On some of our elections, if just the NAVs voted at full turnout, they would actually be able to call any race in my county. That's the power of a NAV. Think about that. So if you especially have not as many Dems like in our community, we have to have NAVs to change our voter outcome, our candidates that get elected and similar. Jefferson County, the city of Madras. So now we're talking less than 7,000 people. You have 800 some Dems, you have 1,100 Republicans, you have 2,400 NAVs in the city of Madras. Think about that. You have more NAVs than all the other votes combined. Again, I always tell the kids, I tell them I'm in high school, if you guys got your friends and you all voted, you wanted somebody to be mayor of Madras, you could actually choose the mayor of Madras. That's one way to try to get them out there and to even run if you could. And then again, in the city of Madras, NAVs under 35, there's over 1,200. So when you see that, you can see why doing the NAV outreach is a game changer. I just think it's a huge game changer. So I will kick this. I will kick this to, I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to kick this information to Teresa so that it'll have the contact information for me. Oh, did you get it in the chat, Teresa? So they already have it?
I did put it in the chat, and
Okay.
we will share it in the newsletter that goes out with the video. And first question is from Yvette, who's asking, how much do you budget per voter and what was the return on the effort? In other words, how many personalized postcards went out and how many NAVs responded by voting blue?
So when our original goal was to try to get NAVs to be involved with the Democratic Party, it was like almost zilch, because who wants to come to another meeting, right? And kids know better, they're smarter than we are. But when we started doing as far as the outreach to get them to vote, we saw a dramatic increase. So people who weren't at the beginning, I wanted to let you know that again, percentage wise, Jefferson County was one of the top 2 counties that had an increase in Dem, NAVs changing to Dems. Real quick, is everyone else's screen flashing or is it just mine because I have a share?
Yours.
I think it's
Okay, just want to
you.
make sure because it's like real annoying. So I just want to be annoying everybody. So that it was actually for us a pretty big change where we saw quite a few. Again, we're targeting young voters. We did 35 and under with ours. And what we did was through the Democrats, we just put some money aside for this. We did a Check for Democracy grant to get ourselves a printer and some paper. That's been huge. That is eligible for any of your counties can put in for grants like that every year. And then the other thing that we did is, like with myself, I'll be honest, I just started this last year. Every month I get a roll of stamp like on auto delivery. So I can just sit them to the side. So I share them with other counties. I use them in our program and similar. Most people can give even $20 when they're writing postcards. It goes a long ways. So, and then we share that. By that, I mean, it's like some people can have money that they can share. Some people have more time. Some people have both. We just kind of bring it all together. So as far as your cost, postcards cost mostly because of stamps. The cost for the texting and for emailing is basically a zero, right? That's why it's really important you pick who you have your plan, who we want to reach, and what is the change that we're trying to do.
Susan's hand is up.
Susan?
Yeah, hi. I had a question on your last slide. You don't have to bring it up, but my question is, you're showing Dems, Republicans, and NAVs. Did you include the other parties into the NAVs, or were the NAVs just separate from the other parties?
So in my county, it's a conservative county, which again, I deal with rural predominantly. So other than your top 5 counties, the other 31 counties have very few Green Party, even libertarians. So an example would be, we probably have less than 200 max other voters. So you absolutely can include those if you choose to, but you probably know that your Green Party is going to be voting probably aligned with your environmental concerns that individual group is interested in, your human rights concerns. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I wouldn't
Okay.
want to include them. That's why I was asking if you were. Yeah.
We don't send anything to those parties. Those
Okay.
parties have really clear, usually identities and what they want to do.
Understand.
Yep. And so
Thank
the same reason why some people will send it to all of their NAVs, I figure, like in my community, if you're over 50, you know how you're going to vote and you know how to get that information. It really tends to be our younger voters who they might not even get the voter's pamphlet because the oldest person, the parent or the guardian in the home, is probably who gets it and who sees it. They might not even see it or even know it's available. So that's why we focus on education and similar about campaigns, candidates, ballot measures, etc.
Thank you.
Next question is from Kathy, who's asking, with younger NAVs, are they more likely to be responsive to a younger person conducting the personal outreach, or is it okay if we users do it?
Personal outreach. Okay, so personal outreach, if you can, if you're like for me, when I go and I do work in Metolius, over 3/4 of that community, it's a very small town, like less than 1,000, and that's where I did my elementary school, so I pretty much love it. Also, one of my best friends lives there. She's a native Mexican, and so she is amazingly bilingual, of course, and she also is executive director of one of our local children's programs, and so she's well known in that community. And so, yeah, I take her with me because she's from that community, and that could look a lot of different ways. So if you're in a very like if you're in an African American community, your best bet is to be respectful with that. I was talking with a campaign today about coming in and going to the Latino festival that we have in Jefferson County that has over a couple thousand people in one day. And I'm like, do you have anyone on your campaign who's Latino? And she's like, no. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to fly. You have to, she's like, oh, so-and-so kind of speaks some Spanish. I'm like, and that's not going to fly. So the point is, so we'll talk with her about how do we get somebody who is for that candidate, who will be there to be respectful for that community. So when possible, do whatever it is within that community. But young people, absolutely. So if I'm sending out postcards to younger people, I run it through kids. I mean, by kids, I mean high schoolers, basically under 25, under 30, to check in with them. Like, I'll do a survey. Hey, what are you guys' top 5 issues right now? Because I don't want to list an issue that's important to me that they don't care about. It's a broad question, but it's not just about the age, it's also about the community. So if you're in a Latino area, obviously you want a young Latino who's bilingual, who can be respectful to the older people in that home, as well as be hip enough to have the younger people care. That's when they tend to swap out the text messages and they no longer listen to you or I, which is great.
So the next question kind of piggybacks on that, which was, how were you able to talk directly to the young voters? And did you ask to go into classrooms, or how else did you do it?
I'll be honest. I got so disgusted is probably too strong a word, but it was pretty close to that. I would go to the meetings, and every meeting, every month, everyone would say, oh, we need to do voter outreach with the young people. And then every month it was the same thing and no one was willing to do anything. So finally I said, you know what? Okay, fine. They don't like my ideas. I'm just going to go do it. So in my case, I joined the Kiwanis on the condition that they'd let me be the advisor to Key Club, because I knew it would get me into the high schools. Now, when I'm in the schools, I'm very careful. I don't talk about Democrats or Republicans, other than I actually worked with another advisor from Rotary with Interact. She was a Republican. We sometimes talked about the fact that our values about serving the community were very similar. But what because I don't want them fighting. These kids they just know so much hatred towards each other. And that's so distasteful that kids are choosing to not be involved in politics because of that. And so what I've done with my kids is every time we have activities, like we do a lot of cultural activities. My Latino club, my Key Club is 85% Latina. They literally they're hungry to be involved in clubs that are fully accepting of them. But I have the advantage that everyone in my family is married to a Latino or Latina. And so I'm a little bit maybe more familiar with that, even though I'm white. And so literally you just have to ask questions, be respectful, and just ask them what they value. So if you don't have those connections in your community, find somebody who does, and find somebody who's willing to work with you. And instead of, when you talk about your volunteers, we have a tendency to have 1 or 2 volunteers do everything. Find a volunteer who actually is good with engaging with younger people, and give them the support they need to do it. You know what I mean? Kids will come places for food. I always bribe them with food. I make cookies, bars of it, because it's easier, but it's like, I always have food. I always have pizza. Everyone pitches in to cover that for the kids, because that's how we get some really good discussions about values and similar. And these kids have chosen to do almost all of the activities in our community are cultural activities, because they want people to know that it's okay to be Latino and that you can still be a great student, et cetera. So I know that, again, I know sometimes it's not as specific, but what I find is we don't help people who want to work with youth. We need to support them better.
Roger, your hand is up.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Just a little bit of preface before my question. A socio-psychological trend in America is characterized as becoming unbounded. That is, rejecting traditional labels. Unbounded, for example, non-binary, etc. And so when we look at NAV as a label, you know, there are people who, even from their employment, identify as gig worker, they're unmarried, etc. They don't want to be labeled by these traditional bounds. So if we are basing our connection with NAVs by putting them into a class, which by default or definition implies they're being aligned with the boundaries or privileges that accrue to that affiliation, it may be viewed more as a projection onto that person than they're willing to accept. So what if we were to approach NAVs from the standpoint that we understand your open identification, and we hold these values with respect to that, instead in terms of race and age and demographics, etc. What if we opened our minds to the fact that they are currently, if not forever, unbounded by the way they view society? Thank you.
Well, I'll throw out there first, Roger, that I'm non-binary, so I can appreciate that. I also can tell you that I'm willing and it's reasonable to use she, they, because in my community, I would be destroyed, right? So you just have to pick and choose your battles. I want to say that you're right in some ways, very much. And it's something to think about in around being respectful towards people. So at the same time, if you are wanting to write postcards, you can cost 1/10 of the amount if you go after young people, knowing that they're going to have similar values to what the average indivisible member has. So why would you go after the person that isn't necessarily going to have those values if you're trying to get them to understand what your issues are? So how I choose to do it is primarily around education. So I let them know they're non-affiliated. I let them know what that means. It means you're not going to be able to vote for, in this case, they weren't able to vote for the Secretary of State. They weren't able to vote for the Attorney General. You know, does that make sense? It's like, what are you not going to be able to do? But it's like, so then they can make a choice. So that is more like if they choose, because in politics, you do have your choices make a difference on your ability to have your voice. And so, but I did say earlier that to me, and it's like, we don't have to have people register to be Democrats or Green Party or what we're trying to do. We actually just need them to vote. And we want them to vote in ways that allows people to be who they are, which is what you're talking about. You're talking about being respectful. So one thing I oftentimes do is I just say, hey, the Jefferson County Democrats value, and then I put in what we value. You want to stand with us? This is what we value. And so I don't ever attack the other side or anything like that. I just say, here's what we value. And or here are the candidates who value these things. Because to me, that is the strength of it. So an example would be, I like to talk about reproductive rights. The kids in my community, healthcare is not something that not everybody has. And because we're the 35th, 36th, we're right there for poverty, right? So, and that includes what our healthcare looks like. So it's like, I talk about reproductive rights. I talk about the environment. So let them choose to be with the values that I'm writing on that postcard. Or when you're doing an outreach, like if you're sending people to Canvas, you need to be really clear. What are we going to talk about with people? What are the values we're going to talk about? And so again, yeah,
Well, I just wanted to break in because we're running out of time. And
Yeah,
on the
sorry.
call, we've got Michelle Innes, who just recently led a very successful canvas of NAVs for Bynum. And we wanted to hear from her and why she chose to focus on the NAVs and how it went, and just a little bit of update
because that's
on
why
that.
you won, isn't it, Michelle? Good job, by the way. I mean, that is, it's the NAVs, which are a really, really big deal. That's what it's going to take right now.
Well, hi, everybody. And it's great to hear from you, Kim, and good to be here. So I'll just be very brief. We started our inaugural canvassing with for Janelle Bynum, and we went to Lake Oswego, and we worked with her chief of staff, Brett Mulligan, who was really great. And anyway, we had, I did a training, and there were about 11 people that showed up. But the most impressive news is that we had over 60 conversations, and many of those people were NAVs. And everybody came back with feeling pretty buoyed up by the interactions that they had. So, you know, they weren't all positive, but mostly they were. And there were some, I don't know exactly what the percentages were. There were some Democrats that were definitely going to vote Democrat, but maybe didn't know much about Janelle. And so it was an opportunity to educate them. Then there were quite a few people who really not only didn't know much about Janelle, but really were the NAVs that we're talking about. And a lot of those conversations were really productive. So there's a schedule. I think it's pretty much weekly of canvases coming up. I'm going to go this Saturday. I might do a training if there are new people that need that. Otherwise, I'm going to go canvas, and we're trying to work with Brett and with the campaign to see how we're going to coordinate things with Indivisible Oregon, which I'm a member of, and I also am a leader in Indivisible Cedar Mill, which is a suburb of Portland. We do a lot of letters, and we also have really focused on doing postcards for CD5, and we'll do more. And so that's basically about it. You know, we had our first event, and out of the gate, it went pretty well.
Michelle, that's great. And I want to encourage people that if you're going to do NAV outreach, it's really important to work with somebody like Michelle, who has some experience in the communities you're going to, because a lot of your questions were, what about, you know, the different communities? Every county, every race, like CDs are huge in Oregon. Every area has very different, like what you would do in our Warm Springs community, because it's on a reservation. I'm not invited there. I have to get an invitation and have permission to be on the reservation. So as example would be, if you're not familiar with some of your areas, you might not know that. So it's very important to work with people who know your different communities. What you did in Lake Oswego, is that what you said? Might be very different from what you do over here in Bend. It might be the same. You know, CD5 is a bizarre CD. That's a great job, though.
I'm just going to add, because I attended this canvas that Michelle ran, and she did a great job on the training. And my experience in talking to some of the NAVs on my list was just so interesting, because, as you said, Kim, they hadn't voted for either candidate in the primary. And so they really, I mean, virtually they all knew nothing about either candidate. Yeah. And so they were actually very appreciative of having some information about the candidates, and the way that Michelle's focus was to invite them first to tell us what issues were important to them. And based on that, we could determine whether they were going to be friendly or maybe not so friendly. Great. And if they were friendly, we followed up with, well, let me tell you about one of the candidates in this race, Janelle Bynum, because she's going to fight for those very issues that are important to you. And if they said, you know, are more interested in gun rights, then we just said, thanks for that information. Have a great day. See you later. And that's important data too, because that goes into the system for the candidate, you know, to know later which NAVs to go back to, when it's time to get out the vote. So it's just really a great program. So
That's
good job,
huge because
Michelle.
again, yeah, like I said, I own guns. I am never going to fight for gun rights. You know what I mean? I'm going to vote for, like, what are we doing all these guns? So even a question like that really does separate people out. The other thing I'm going to say that, Michelle, maybe you know this, but just a reminder, all those people that you and Debbie and everybody connected with, they might actually now be voters for life. Think about all those collective votes because somebody took the time to talk to them about issues and about the value of their vote. That's the thing I think we forget.
That is so true. I remember from 2 years ago when my wife went canvassing, and she talked to somebody who was really ambivalent and not, non-committal. And after she did her spiel, he said, nobody has bothered. I've gotten all these flyers and I get a lot of text messages and I don't pay attention to them, but nobody else has bothered to come to my door and talk to me. Because you did, I'm going to vote for your candidate. So you never know where your love is going to land.
Susan, you've got a question?
You're muted, Susan.
I have comments. So I want to first comment about youth vote. Here in Sisters Bend, Redmond area, Central Oregon, we're working with the League of Women Voters Deschutes. They have a youth program. There's also a youth program at the national level, several programs within the youth program at the national and at the state level, and probably in your local communities, there's a League of Women Voters. And so if you want to help the youth vote, you can help with them, because I think not duplicating work in schools, like the mock elections that they already conducted prior to the primary, things like that. I think, advocating and getting your face and name known within the school, then it's easier to go back and do something else like you were talking about, Kim. And then the other part I wanted to talk about was CD5. So I'm sure some of you on this call know that Mary Chapin in Sisters has been the leader on a huge effort, which was all the NAVs. There's over 230,000 NAVs in CD5. And Indivisible National narrowed it down to the NAVs that commonly vote. And so that was 40,000. She has gotten postcards out to people across the district and is only 1,500 away from 30,000 of them. So there might be another push for another 10,000 postcards, which will all be sent in the fall. So this is Mary Chapin leading this effort. And I just think it's amazing.
Does anybody else have any
muted, Kim.
questions? We're a little bit past 8.
Stamps, that would be my question. I can send her some roll of stamps. Is that something that's helpful with her?
We have
I'm sure she would love that.
You're welcome to, but we've actually gotten a lot of the groups and people paid for their own stamps, but Indivisible also donated. We got some money from Indivisible, and we raised some funds through the DRAT team. And so I think we've paid for all the stamps that people requested stamps for.
By the way, you should be proud of that. If you're not, that's amazing right there, y'all.
I think so. I'm really, whoever besides Mary's working on this, it's amazing. It is 30,000 postcards. Those are going to get mailed in fall. Wow.
Again, we would meet usually in groups of less than 10. We would yammer, we would write postcards, we would complain or tease each other if someone had only done 2 and someone else had done 20, all in good fun. And we enjoyed meeting and working on those. So you can, for people that don't want to be out in the public sector doing knocking on doors, having a postcard writing campaign is fantastic. So the texting tends to be more of a tightened program that happens more at once, right? Usually it's closer to the end of elections and similar, whereas the other work is done normally more throughout the year. Texting is changing, so maybe that's not the case anymore.
So I've become a bit of a broken record in trying to point all of our members to the Congressional District 6 race and holding the seat for Andrea Salinas since I moved to Yamhill. But in the last election, Andrea won by the same amount that Jamie lost by, and it's going to be a very, very tight election. I know I was phone banking for Andrea last Thursday, and I got a hold of Roger, who's on the call tonight, who expressed a big interest in starting a postcard writing campaign with Andrea. So I'm wondering if maybe Roger wants to put his name in the chat, or however to reach him, and maybe we can get some of that going too.
That's good.
But we want to hold, obviously we're going to work on the 5th as much as we can, but it needs to be a double effort, I think.
And I'll just remind everybody that we're going to continue to put information about canvases and phone banks and other opportunities for both Andrea and Janelle Bynum in our weekly newsletter, which will come out with notes from tonight, tomorrow. We try to put that out on Wednesdays. And we also, I know we've been talking about adopting Arizona because we know Biden's going to win here in Oregon, so we don't necessarily need to fight for him here in Oregon. We know that we don't have a Senate race here in Oregon, and they do have an important one in Arizona. So remember that that's going to be a focus for us going forward. And so we do now have the opportunity to write some postcards to get out the vote for Arizona's primary to Democrats in Arizona. And I'm going to put that link in the chat. It's similar to postcards to voters, but it's actually even easier because all you have to do is click on that link and choose the current campaigns and choose Arizona, and then make your request for however many addresses you want, and you supply the postcards and stamps. So again, that's to help get out the vote to Democrats for the primary, to get them focused on voting, because we're going to need all their votes and then some for the general election.
Don't forget, on Wednesday, the 26th, the Bat Drat team will have a general meeting for anyone interested in helping us flip Lori Chavez Dreamer right out of District 5. It'll be at 7 o'clock Zoom meeting that night. And we're going to have Janelle Bynum has agreed to come and address the group that night. So we'll be talking about what our strategies are, what we can do. And it's a chance for everybody across the state to get involved in this race.
And we'll put that link in the notes that go out tomorrow.
Okay.
I don't have it handy right now.
I did have it, but it's somewhere on my computer. But we'll be in the notes tomorrow, along with the link for this recording. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. It's just awesome. I hope you're all inspired by what you heard tonight. Kim, you were awesome. I've got all these notes about things we can do in District 5 and ways we can apply what you said. So I just think it's awesome that you came and talked to us, and I hope that we stay in touch with you as we go forward in this race.
Great job, everybody. I'm real impressed. By the way, if people have counties that you want me to come and present at or work with a small group about doing the postcard writing or something like that, I'm happy to do that. Or I'm happy to brainstorm ways to reach out to youth. And I could even maybe bring a couple kids with me. It'd be virtual, but I could still maybe bring a couple kids with me if that would be helpful. So anyway, thanks, everybody.
Great meeting. Thank you so much, Kim. And don't forget, this is a big weekend of action coming up, and find your nearest rally or sign demonstration. Call your congressional leaders and stand up for women's reproductive rights. It's on the line, and it's never been more important to get people involved.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah, I'll do that. There you go.